Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this recap of episode 59 of The Question. I have Kevin Coyle with me here. Kevin, thanks for being here, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
I just want to say I'm really grateful to have Omelette as an exclusive sponsor for this episode of The Question. You likely know about their dashboard tool, but they just released Omelette for VS Code, which is an extension that brings some of their analytics information right into your dev environment. You can check out the special offers that they're offering for the Question community in this episode's FigJam file. Kevin, thanks for jumping back in right away. I know we just got off the deep dive call, so
We
I'm sure
did.
you're a little bit zoomed out here, but I found it to be really positive. I think I was a little bit nervous
Yes.
this was going to be a little doomsday feeling, you know?
hmm
What were you expecting going in?
Well, looking at the data, it was more positive than I thought, but it wasn't quite like singing optimism. We called it cautiously optimistic, didn't we?
That's right.
Yeah, when we were talking to people and we started to shed a bit of light on how they were, but not how they were using it so much, but what their experiences was when things were coming in and things were changing. It was quite illuminating, definitely. And I always think that with these things, the best way to get rid of some fear is just to shine some light on it. That's all you need to
That's
do.
right. Yeah. So if you missed the question or the deep dive session, we talked about design systems and AI and how these things could integrate, how they are integrating, what the future of our roles looks like in this field with things changing so rapidly. And we asked three questions. We asked, how are you feeling about your future in design systems given the current state of AI? Then we asked you to explain that answer. And then finally, we asked, how are you actually using AI to support your system program and how's that going? You can see in the FigJam file the results from the first of those questions where we saw sort of an average of 3.3, which, as you said, Kevin, kind of we made it, we called that sort of cautiously optimistic. And I love these two sort of call outs in the FigJam, these quotes from the raw data. On the far left, very pessimistic side, we had somebody say, I feel like someone is pulling the rug from underneath me. And on the far right, very optimistic side, we had someone say, I think there's never been a more exciting time for us as design system practitioners. So I think it's possible that both of these things can be true at the same time.
I felt both of these, honestly, as I say. When I've given AI a small prompt and it's made an entire application that would have took me weeks to create, I feel like, what is the purpose of me? What am I good for anymore? But then again, when I'm able to get my work done quite quickly and I'm able to throw things away, that's what the good thing is, really quickly. I think the other end as well. I think,
Yeah.
wow, what a time to be alive.
Yeah, we talked about this quite a bit actually towards the beginning of the deep dive. This idea of separating outcomes from output. And I know
Yes.
that really resonated with a lot of people. Do you want to summarize sort of what we described there, Kevin, in the deep dive?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the things that is a common misconception by people that aren't necessarily in the weeds with us and creating these things. Some people might think that the actual outcome of what we're creating is a piece of code, is a binary executable that's going to be on there and that is it. In actual fact, it's not. It's the conversations that happen before it. It's the bike shedding sometimes that we have. If you don't know that phrase, it's where you're arguing about what color to paint the bike shed for weeks and weeks and weeks. And we used to say that was a bad thing, but yeah, it might not be, because it might be one of those things that contribute to the overall value of the finalized thing.
Yeah, I think it was a really interesting conversation. It kind of led us into all kinds of interesting, threads of topic. One of those was around documentation and using systems to kind of write docs. And I think that we all agreed there were some places where maybe that's okay and some places where it's not okay. But that was, I think, in the data we saw the most common use that folks have experimented with was just saying, hey, can you help me write some documentation? What are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
I can understand why the first thing that you would actually do with an LLM is to start to write documentation, because sometimes the writing documentation can feel a little bit tedious. Oftentimes as well, it's one of the last things that you do. That's the reality of it. It does happen regardless of what we try to say beforehand, that documentation should be part of the process.
Yeah.
in reality it doesn't actually happen. So it's nice to be able to have that shortcut, isn't it? To be able to press a button and it knows all about your application and can do it. But it doesn't, does it? It doesn't have those sleepless nights where you're arguing with someone on Slack about how this user interaction should work and how you think that your way is better and they think that their way is better, and then you come to some kind of mutual compromise, and that explains the context as to why something is built that way. It doesn't understand really the thoughts and the feelings that go towards why something has been created. Context again. LLMs only have the context window, and that context window is often filled with actual information to create something. It there's no context window big enough at the moment to be able to fulfill our experiences.
It's so interesting. And I think it helped me to sort of like firm up my belief around design system documentation, which is that the most valuable part of documentation is actually writing it. In other
Mm,
words, forcing the
yeah,
teams to come together and align on a concept so that you can get it written
yeah,
is the actual value, you know? And
that's
when we
so
when
true.
we outsource that to AI, we're losing out on that alignment part.
We're losing out on some of the big light bulb moments when we're going through and we're writing documentation and we say, hang on, this is made like this. Why have we done this?
Yeah.
This is wrong. It's almost like an additional part of QA as well. And AI won't do that. It will just accept it and it will say it's written like this for such and such a reason. And I get that all the time. I don't know if you've used AI commit messages before in Git. Oh, I use them quite often because I'm lazy, and I really shouldn't because I do read them. These are projects that I'm working on my own. When I'm working
Yeah,
with other
yeah.
people, I'll make sure I write a proper commit message. But I will do something stupid. I will write something really stupid, and the commit message that the AI says, oh, Kevin has. We would say Kevin has done this, but let's say we've done this for extra security or performance, and it really enhances the functionality. No, it's not. It's because I couldn't be bothered to do it properly, and I just needed it done. But the AI, it's got that affirming nature, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And that is dangerous in documentation. So yeah, it's one of those things that I believe that at the moment I don't think the AI has the context window in order to write the documentation that is required and useful for human beings. It may do in the future though. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It was an interesting thread for sure. And especially because so many folks are experimenting with that.
Mm,
Lots of things, lots of topics. We spent a good amount of time talking about how to sort of interact with the leadership inside of our organizations that are oftentimes maybe feeling pressure that the business is going to be left behind if they're not quick enough to get AI happening in their
yeah.
product in some way. And folks had a lot to say about this. It was clear to me that there's a lot of they're taking that pressure. Our leaders are taking that pressure and just pushing it down to teams
Yeah.
to say, figure this out. Go do something cool with AI. Have you had that experience, or like, what's your thought on that?
I've had so many experiences about that, and some cool little things that have been created that I've observed and actually worked on as well. Many fast prototypes and things of that nature. But the thing that is quite disheartening as well, though, with this is that oftentimes people are just throwing another chatbot at things. And it was one of the contributors mentioned having this idea of the ephemeral user interface as well, about having
Yeah.
personalized user interfaces. And I think, although at the moment we're currently just throwing another chatbot at it, what it is doing, we're starting to think about, we're using it more and we're starting to think about actually, we can do something that we've not been able to do before. So even though leadership is making us put in AI in everything, we're getting that experience now where we can say, maybe not another chatbot, but wait, what if I did this? And I don't know what this is, but
Mhm.
there's going to be plenty of intelligent people as they gain experience. They're gonna think of ways to use this that we can't even fathom right
Somebody in the conversation mentioned this idea of like it was Julie. Julie said, we have this problem sometimes in our organization where we have like a high profile example of an AI use case, like somebody prototypes something and it happens really good. They do it in 30 seconds or something wild, and it becomes almost like this scenario where leaders see that, they grab on to that as a concept and say, we need that everywhere. You took this process from 10 days to 10 minutes. Now we need to do that same math on every process in the org, right? And of course,
Yeah.
that's unrealistic. And the work that's needed to take that prototype example and sort of translate it out throughout the rest of the organization in some capacity, that's a lot of work to do, right?
Yeah,
So,
we get the thing, don't we? Like we show something to leadership that we vibe coded and we've done it really fast, and then they turn around. They actually want something that's enterprise grade, and then we say it's going to take some time, and they say to us, Tony Stark built this in a cave with a bunch of scraps. They say that sort of thing.
yeah,
That happens. That happens. But again, it's where the value is. We need to
yeah,
communicate where the value is and what we're creating.
yeah. That ties in nicely to something that I think Elise brought up, which is the value, of course, is less in the outputs. It's more in the strategy, in the thinking, and the sort of
Yeah,
nuance that requires, at this point at least, requires a human to be involved. So
yeah.
really good, almost philosophical conversation kind of sprung out of that. It's really neat.
And that's what it's going to be, though, isn't it? At the end of the day, a lot of the technical discussions that we're going to talk about and all of that, it's going to be done for us. The technical nitty gritty of a lot of the AI stuff, it is going to be done for us. It's up to us as human beings to philosophize. That's what we're good at. And
Yeah,
I'm glad that was the conversation.
I know, right?
I'm really glad that we weren't talking about tokens per second or a new MCP or something like that. And that is very interesting. That definitely is. But it's only interesting for a few minutes.
Yeah. We had a lot of conversation around context and the criticality of context in
Mm.
working with an AI. I think it was summarized in this statement that's like, hey, if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out, right? Can you say a little bit about context in your experience working with AIs, Kevin? And I'd love for you also to talk a little bit about a concept called dilution that you brought up in the deep dive, but start
Yeah,
with sort of that
yeah.
context.
And prompt drift as well.
Yeah.
So the way in which I tend to build AI-based applications, I tend to do it. Maybe it's because I'm old school. I don't know. I prefer to do things in a functional way. So AIs don't tend to have a deterministic output. LLMs don't. They're not deterministic by design. So what I like to be able to do is to have a get closer to being able to predict what's going to be the output of it, and I will write very pointed prompts to that, and the length of it shouldn't matter. It's the quality of it that matters. I hate it when people brag and say we've just found the system prompt for this tool and it's 6,000 lines long or something like that. It's like that's not a good thing. That is not at all. Waffle isn't good, which is probably what I'm doing now, but it's what's important is remember that LLMs aren't intelligent. What they essentially are probability machines, and they're there. And this dumbs it down a lot. And there are people that know much more about this than me will correct this, but basically they're predicting the next token, and what goes in as context is going to guide what that predict the probability of that next token is. And if you've got 6,000 pages of unrelated waffle, then more than likely the next token is going to be unrelated waffle. So be
Mm.
pointed with it, be accurate with it, test it, make it functional, make many calls rather than just one. So if you know the output of that prompt is going to give you predictably good results, leave it, make another one, and make a chain.
Yeah, that's such good advice for folks who are just getting started with this, especially. I think you said a really practical thing you could do is just start a new chat, right? Like, don't
Yeah,
just continue. A lot of the conversation came down to, as is common, I think, like us thinking about what should we do as design system practitioners, and how does this stuff impact our careers? I kind of had summarized this in like sort of three big things that I think we could start to do. The first was focus more on like how do we position the system itself as the training for the AI.
Mhm.
And so a lot of people in their answers had talked about this idea of the system is the input for AI, and we need to
Yeah.
sort of embrace that idea. And that means we're needed, right? Because we're the ones building that training data essentially. The second one was, we need to shift a little bit from being people who make components to being people who are more strategic in our systems work. There's a ton that we could unpack there. And then the third is like, what are the new skills that we needed to develop?
Yep.
AI tool management or quality, things like that. Did this sort of fit your idea or thinking of sort of where our careers are going?
Yeah, it's that idea as well that we mentioned in the call about people do say that AI is just another tool. I actually disagree with that. It's not another tool. It's like the invention of the factory.
Mm,
That's what it is. And as we do that, we look at again. We mentioned it before, where the value is created. We've talked about that, but also is we look at our skills. Like the 21st century designer, writer, analyst needs to learn how to direct and shepherd AI agents in a way, and that's it. It becomes being able to prompt properly, being able to identify a good model for something. That's a skill in itself. That's a new skill. Um,
yeah.
so being able to say I want to use GPT-5 Mini rather than using GPT-5 Thinking or something like that, and knowing that is just as important, as knowing when you want to use a particular tool in Figma or or, or something else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super important to be understanding, or aware of all those different models and like what they're best used for.
Yeah.
Anything else that you wanted to sort of call out in from the conversation?
Um, I think a few of the discussions. I think Elise mentioned some some interesting points about how the positioning of AI was,
Mm,
and how that is getting used in their day to day, and what it really is, and how it's going to manifest. So when we talk about user interface, currently most of the time we have static user interfaces. We create it once, we test it, and then that's it. But Elise mentioned, like, what if we position AI to actually use the design system as context, and then the AI could generate the appropriate user interface for the user's problem that's personalized and that resonates with them. Now that is so exciting to
yeah,
see.
that's really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is.
There's a couple
Yeah,
links to articles around ephemeral UI and things like this in
yeah,
the resources bar in that FigJam file. So check those out for sure, if that's a topic that you're interested in. Um, I don't know. I mean, one thing we didn't talk about in the deep dive, Kevin, that I wanted to ask you about is
yeah,
I did a little sort of work on correlating, like folks who answered lower on the optimism question, that first question, how
yeah.
did they respond later in the open text answers versus the folks who had much more optimistic views of the current state of things. And one of the things that was really clear is that folks who scored or answered lower on the optimism have done much less. It seems they sort of claim less experience with AI
Yeah.
versus folks who have higher optimism, and they sort of claim a great amount of experimentation. And I was just wondering, like, from that data, we don't know, right, which is the chicken and which is the egg. We don't know if folks use AI more because they're feeling optimistic, or if feeling optimistic has led them to want to use it more, you know? And
Hmm.
so it's a tricky, what is your take on that?
Again, it's I do believe that shedding light on things removes fear, and some of this can be dismissed as unwarranted fear, but some of it is genuine fear, and it has it's some of it is rational, because
Yeah.
people do overhype, and they devalue human beings. They don't realize that, again, our value isn't in writing zeros and ones. That's what a machine does. No one writes assembly code anymore. We've got compilers and assemblers to do it for us, but we used to. And they used to say that, oh, we don't need programmers anymore because we've got COBOL. Well, it turned out that we did need programmers. And we just write a lot more code now, and we're
Yeah.
going to be producing a lot more things. So to the people that haven't really tried AI, what I would and are worried about it or are dismissive about it, and what I would say to them is, when you've got a couple of hours just in the afternoon on a Sunday and it's raining outside, get on your computer and start to make something. If you're a designer, go and use something that'll help you and accelerate that. Or if you're a designer, even better, do some code. Like, it democratizes, AI democratizes as well. Um, and go and create an application. Just something silly. I do a new one every week. I know I created a silly little one called Jazz Hands, where it does music for me. With it detects my fingers, and I could do like an instrument like that. I'll show you that later.
All
And then
right.
I did another one to help me learn Korean. I'm not going to release any of these, but because these can be created so quickly, it is such an exhilarating thing, and it removes that anxiety from AI, and you see what it is in the light.
Yeah. I think that's such a good point. Just the unknown is scary, right? So it requires some work to go experiment, to go play, to go learn these things. But there's a lot of
Yeah,
information out there about how to get started. So go read some of that and start playing around, you know.
yeah,
I tried to sort of summarize, like, one of the things I think that's a struggle with the question is oftentimes we end up asking more questions than we answer in these deep discussions, you know. So I've been trying to do some work to figure out how do we like synthesize this down into some stuff that we can like take away from it. So I did that with this session, and I landed on a handful of things, 6 ideas. One was, again, to position the design system as the context engine for AI driven product creation.
hmm,
I also saw in the data that we need to start, like, the folks who were successful with this started with very low risk things. You know, they just like started do a consistency audit for me, right? Like things that are a little bit more menial task type stuff, you know.
yeah,
And that was a nice sort of way to get into using the tool and get familiar with it. Um, I think there's definitely a need to sort of pair that work with strong governance. And Caroline from Ramp dropped in up at the top of the FigJam file some examples of how she is helping her organization be really smart in the way they use AI. She's been done a bunch of work to write really nice AI guidelines
yeah,
for their team. So check those out in the FigJam for sure.
yeah. Well,
Um, and another one, of course, invest in education, right? Like, I mean, this stuff is constantly changing, so we've got to be doing the work to figure out like what's new. How do I stay current? Um,
yeah,
I think the idea of accessibility and ethics were two things that kept coming up in the data that we didn't even get to touch on in the deep dive. But
yeah,
the folks who were concerned about AI mentioned these ideas often, you know, as like a concern. And so in my thinking, that means just addressing those things early on, especially things like accessibility checks and, you know, like
yeah,
testing for bias and all that kind of thing. So just doing that early to make sure that you're alleviating those fears. And then, of course, there's always work to do around executive, you know, alignment and support. So,
yeah,
you know, showing them how the system and AI are the combination that powers the future of the product, I think is a strong place there.
yeah. I want to maybe put a little caveat on the education thing, and
Yeah, do it.
education is very important. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that.
Hmm.
But there is a lot of information right now, and there is a lot of things happening, and it can make it, and I want to say this to everyone really, that it can make it feel like you could drown with the amount of information that is coming at you. You do not need to know every model. You do not need to know every MCP that's coming through. You will not be left behind if you take a 2 week vacation and you come back and all of a sudden everything's different again. I think we just need to learn to accept that these things are going to happen and it's going to change rapidly, but we just take what we need and we learn what we can, and don't expect full perfection, that you're going to lose your job if you're not the most knowledgeable thing on everything with this. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's such. I think that's probably a very needed message. I mean, I literally just took a week off, and I came back, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, what did I miss?" And
Yeah,
started looking, and I felt that sort of creeping in.
yeah.
So I think that's a great encouragement to the community. Kevin, this is awesome, man. Thank you so much for setting aside time to do this. I know it takes a lot of effort to join in as a co-host, but I really do appreciate your perspective. I think there's so much we can learn from the questions that we ask. So I'll continue to dig into that data. Thanks again for being here, buddy.
No, thank you so much.
And a last little bit of thanks to Omelet for their sponsorship. Thanks so much for supporting this community work that we're trying to do around knowledge and sharing and collaborative learning. That's much appreciated. Make sure you check out the offers they've got for us in the FigJam file. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.